Hello and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source for the long haul. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? How can we all do it better? Very excited to talk to my guest today. Before I introduce her, I want to make sure you know who the voices are in this podcast. I am your host today, solo hosting. I'm sorry, everyone. My name is Richard Littauer. I hope you know that. And my guest today is Carlotta A. Professor Berry, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. How is Indianapolis?
Indianapolis, it's Indianapolis. I'm not a native, so it is what it is.
Where are you native from?
I'm from Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, amazing. I have a cousin in Nashville. It's a nice place. Carlotta is the professor and Lawrence Giacoletto Endowed Chair in Electrical and Computer Engineering and a visiting scientist at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. That is awesome. What is the Children's Museum of Indianapolis?
It is one of the largest children's museums in the world. And so it is the claim to fame for Indianapolis on top of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And the Children's Museum has 4 floors, including also an outdoor area like a sportsplex. And I work in the STEM lab, which means I do STEM activities on robotics and electrical engineering for the children and adult visitors. And I also do robotics programming for visitors to the museum. As the visiting scientist, my goal is to amplify seeing more girls and Black and brown kids doing STEM and seeing engineers and scientists that look like them every time I go.
That is the coolest job. So you get to play with robotics all day with kids.
Yeah, robots and electronics. And when I'm there, that's what I'm doing.
That's amazing. Now, Carlotta, you've done a lot before you ended up here. You have a bachelor's degree in mathematics from Spelman College. You have a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from GIT. So you have 2 bachelors, and then you have a master's.
I do.
And you have a PhD from Vanderbilt. Tell me how you went from PhD and what was it in to where you are today.
Well, I actually only got my PhD because I wanted to be an engineering professor. And I wanted to be an engineering professor because as an undergraduate student at Georgia Tech, I rarely saw Black and brown professors or Black and brown students, and I rarely saw women or female students. And so as an engineering student, I was like, they're not making this look exciting, fun, diverse, any of the above. So I decided I wanted to be an engineering professor. And so I figured to do that, I had to get my PhD. So a lot of people get their PhD because they want to do world-class research or they want to live in a lab and change the world. I got my PhD because I just wanted to be an academic and show students the coolness of engineering and that Dilbert and MacGyver are not the only engineers in the world.
They're not. Can you tell me a bit? The PhD process is horrendous. It's normally very hard for people. Most people have a difficult time. It sounds like you did a PhD because you wanted to have fun and be a role model. Did that help you get through that process?
It 100% did. And I like to say that I had such a difficult time getting my undergraduate engineering degree at Georgia Tech that I think the gods looked down on me and said, your PhD program will not be nearly as difficult. Not saying it was easy, but I think I experienced all of my challenges through undergrad. So grad school was a cakewalk. I sometimes tell students grad school is sometimes easier for you because it's more focused on what you're most interested in. Whereas in undergrad, you may have to take some humanities, some social studies, some government on top of your STEM, your science, technology, engineering, and math classes. And sometimes engineering students, they're like, I'll take that other stuff, even though we know ethics and all of that is important in engineering. Well, once you get to your graduate program, it is extremely focused. So I'm a controls engineer. So it was all controls and robotics. So it's all the stuff that you love. Yeah, writing a dissertation is no cakewalk. The fact it took 6 years was not fun, but it's 6 years of you doing what exactly you love to do, that and having a vision, a mission, and a purpose. So I recently put on TikTok because somebody said, give some advice to some new PhDs. Have a mission, vision, purpose, and goal for your PhD program. And if that happens, when it gets rough, you hold on to your why and you won't quit. Whereas if you're in school for someone else, if you're doing it for somebody or something else, it's very hard to keep going.
I appreciate that. I accepted a PhD position on Monday, yesterday. So that is very timely advice for me. So thank you so much. And thank you for cheering off screen. That was beautiful. So after your PhD, you started 2 nonprofits. You're very not accomplished, just to be clear. Your bio is amazing. That was clearly sarcasm, I hope. So Black in engineering and Black in robotics.
Yes.
Which one is your favorite child?
I have to say robotics. I have to
Tell
say
me about
robotics because I am a roboticist. But interestingly enough, they both started around the same time. It was during the George Floyd protest and the Black Lives Matter movement. So it was during the pandemic. A lot of people were working from home. And right around the time that Black bird watchers started Black Birders Week because of Christian Cooper and Amy Cooper and some racial profiling that had happened in Central Park. And so out of that, we like to say that the Black and X movement was born on social media. Before that time, we had Black and STEM, we had Vanguard STEM, but all of these affinity groups basically were birthed on what I now call musky Twitter, because I will not call it X. And from that, that's where Black in robotics came from. That's where Black in computing, Black in engineering, Black in astro, Black in, it goes on and on. But that's what's how the nonprofits came about. And it was a way for us to speak with one collective voice about things that affected our communities. For example, Black in engineering had a media campaign where we talked about being Black in the ivory and what it's like to be one of only Black engineering professors on your university's campus, about things such as cultural taxation, the double bind, marginalization, microaggressions, et cetera. And it was a way for us to represent those interests without an untenured professor who was somewhere in Indiana and maybe the only Black woman professor on campus, such as myself, to speak on some of those issues without then being targeted because you wanted to talk about those things that are important. So that's where Black in engineering was born out of. And one of the things we did is we had a call to action about becoming an anti-racist institution. And we shared it. We shared the video campaign and people would sign on to implement some of that. It's kind of funny that here we are 4 years past that when we had this great racial reckoning around these organizations. And now the pendulum is starting to swing back the other way because of all of this critical race theory swill and the banning of books that have diverse characters. So now that work is needed even more than it was back then.
There's a lot to unpack. That is awesome. I'm so glad you started that. Before I go anywhere, I have to say I'm a massive bird watcher. It's one of the diseases I have. I love it so much. So I'm really glad you brought up Christian Cooper. I read his book recently. I hope you have too. I thought it was great. No,
I
okay.
haven't. I do apologize, Christian. I will put it on my list. And I love that after all the drama, National Geographic, I believe, hired him.
Yep.
Yeah. That shows you how you can make lemonade from lemons and something good can come from something so horrible. Something else recently happened. Michael Threets, who became famous because he's the guy who was promoting the library and kids and librarians. And he had to quit his job and get off social media because he was being bullied, has now been hired by PBS to promote literacy. So it just shows, yeah, people do this ignorant stuff and then a real blessing comes from it. So that's just awesome.
You mentioned that the pendulum is swinging the other way, and you've already put in all this very hard work, both personally and professionally and in your spare time. It's not easy starting a nonprofit. And historically, there's been so much work put into the civil rights movement, into elevating Black voices, all of the George Floyd protests, et cetera, et cetera. It's infinite. What do you do when you see a pendulum swinging backwards? How do you cheer yourself up and get back to work?
I think you think about who came before you and all that they did. And no matter what amount of effort we put into it, it's nothing compared to what they did. I haven't had fire hoses sprayed on me. I haven't had dogs let loose on me. I haven't had people trying to assassinate me. So if I get in a little Twitter bicker with a bunch of white supremacists, that's nothing. That's baby cake. It's just really about having allies, allyship, and people who are being more than performative. And I think that's important. We now found all these years later that although they were supportive, some of these people were performative because how was it so easy for them to be releasing statements of support and then immediately go, oh, well, no more affirmative action, rip all that diversity stuff off your website and just only give the scholarships to the kids who are coming in because their granddaddy gave money to the library or their mama photoshopped their face on the crew captain. I'm being sarcastic. I think you understand the point. If you really thought diversity was so important that you were willing to give out scholarships and have programs, how can just one statement come out? And I understand you don't want to get sued, but you immediately abandon all this work that you thought added so much value to your university, as opposed to saying, let's get creative and come up with a new way to do that. It's kind of like, especially on social media, you know, you get a lot of, oh, you were a diversity hire. Oh, you were an affirmative action student. That's how you got your PhD. Yeah. And is that supposed to be a problem? So I got my PhD because of affirmative action. Is that better than your Twitter scholarship? I say yes. your PhD in tweets? I say yes. You're never going to have me be ashamed of being a diversity hire or an affirmative action recipient if I was or if I was not, because all of that made me who I am. And now from where I am, I'm changing the world. So it's just that important. But I just think having that fire in your belly, it does not get diminished because we now have a bunch of kooks running around misquoting what intersectional is and what critical race theory is and trying to sue everybody who does anything to support women or people of color.
That is an excellent answer. Thank you so much. One of the words we haven't mentioned yet in this podcast, except at the beginning, is open source. Now, obviously, in robotics, there's a lot of open source. In engineering, there's a lot of open source. Can you tell me how you've engaged with that community and in your work? Do you see it as a separate tranche of people, or do you just see it as part of the work of working with robotics and engineering?
So I was actually already a STEM communicator. I was already a social media communicator. I do engineering professor advice. I do engineering professor quizzes on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. I share my robotics work because Noir STEMist is my company, and the motto is my STEM is for the streets. In my mission to diversify STEM, you have to go where the people are, and I can't just give STEM to my students who pay my high price tuition and for people who pay to go to these expensive conferences or pay the page charges for journals. So in doing that, I had somebody who followed me who worked at Ross. Her name was Kat Scott. And she saw the work that I was doing, and she recommended me to apply for the Open Source Hardware Trailblazer Fellow Program. I didn't know what that was. And then once I read about it, I was like, well, I do that anyway. This is baby cakes. I need to stop saying baby cakes. And so I applied to be an open source hardware trailblazer. And at the time, I'll be honest, I knew what open source software was. Everybody, I think, does because it's been around. It's ubiquitous. It's been used forever. Wasn't totally clear on what open source hardware was. But once I discovered it was basically the same tenets, except now you design hardware where you completely document all of that. So for me and robotics, that would be the CAD files, the 3D printer files, all of the code that I write, the assembly. So I have videos on YouTube. I have the instructions and tutorials on Instructables, on Hackster.io. On my website, I have blog posts about the journey to my open source robots, which are called the flower bots. They grow with you. Lilybot, Daisybot, and Rosiebot. And the other thing about it is I have Lily Infinity Bot because infinity means that you can do whatever you want. There's an infinite amount of ways to engage with my robotic platform. And so I was like, that actually is robotics for the street. So now the thing for my open source hardware is an intersection of the tenets between open source software and open source hardware to make open source robotics. And you can make the robot what you want it to be. And so my robots have been used by everything from K through 12 teachers to middle school, to college, to university, to makers to do with whatever they would like. Although my research was human robot interaction and robotics education, I now say open source robotics is my research area as well because it encapsulates all of that. I now use open source robotics to educate anyone who wants to be educated about STEM. I use robotics to bring STEM to people, and I bring people to STEM and robotics to them in order to diversify the profession. And I cannot do that if I make all of my robotics work so that it is trademarked or so that it is patented. So open source is the way that I get that done.
Excellent. So open source helps you make sure that other people can become maintainers and can learn about it and can build and grow on it. Have you been able to build a community out of those awesome flower bots?
I have probably more than the community. It's just people engaging with my stuff on social media. I gave away so many free robots that eventually I had to just stop doing that. I now sell them on my platform. I sell the kits and I sell the assembled robot, but then all of the materials to make your own are there. So you can get a free one just by doing it yourself if you have access to a 3D printer. So probably more than the community, I have started doing way more in person and online workshops in order to grow people using STEM. Because I'm more about the using the robot to engage in STEM than the robot in and of itself. You can design your own robot for all I care, but are you learning something about STEM you did not know before so that it is not such a foreign concept like it was for a lot of people before? Even some young ladies, I've done Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, etc. And I've had young girls come and go, I don't want to do anything. This robot's going to kill me. So it's a great way for me to educate people on artificial intelligence as well as robotics, what it is and what it is not, and what is CGI, computer graphics, movie stuff that people think is actual robots so that they think the robot's going to kill them.
I hope you're able to dispel that notion fairly quickly.
Computer generated imagery, CGI. I should have said what that stood for, but yes.
So you mentioned Rosebot. That's not the only time you've used that term. You're also a co-director on an NSF STEM grant, right? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yes, I can. So Rosie is the school's mascot. It's an elephant never forgets. My university is science, engineering, and math. So that was Rosie. And so when I started the robots, it was originally a play on the mascot, Rosiebot. And Rosiebot was going to be the research robot. Lilybot was going to be the outreach robot. And Daisybot was going to be more of the education robot. But it's all just kind of merged together into Flowerbots at this point. And the flower works because it grows with you. But Rosebud is a play on Rose Holman. So it's Rose Building Undergraduate Diversity. So it's a scholarship program that I started with a colleague because in electrical engineering, STEM is a little lean on Black and brown students and women anyway, but electrical engineering is significantly so because whereas FIRST robotics competition is great for recruiting kids to STEM and engineering, they think robotics is mechanical engineering. So they all go to mechanical engineering. And I teach mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, computer science, software engineers, biomedical engineers. And what I have to help them to understand is the mechanical part of the robot is building it. That's the gears. That's the kinematics and understanding how it works. If you want software and a brain, that's a computer engineer, computer science or software engineer. If you want electronics and sensors so the robot can think and plan, that is electrical engineering. So educating people that robotics is an intersection of these multiple disciplines, that's what makes it so cool to get lots of different people excited, is important. So the scholarship was started in order to get more people to consider not just electrical and computer engineering, but computer science and software engineering. And the success of the program is that computer science and software engineering at my university has now bypassed electrical and computer engineering in enrollment and in the number of women and students of color. But it doesn't matter. My mission was still achieved. We now have more women in my department as well.
Excellent. Amazing. So I'm listening to you and I'm kind of blown away by the amount of initiatives you're in and the amount of times you mentioned helping enthusiasm and helping other people learn and growing. And so clearly you're very good at boundary setting. You're very good at moving on to the next thing. You're very good at saying, this is what we're doing here. Do you want to be with me or not? If not, well, then I'm going to do something else. What does your day-to-day look like? Is it largely getting funding for these opportunities? Is it doing more research? How do you balance your incredible drive with having all these different projects?
First of all, I want to say thank you for saying that because work-life balance for Black and female faculty is never good. So the fact that you gave me that compliment is really nice, but it's not absolutely true. So I am at a teaching school, which means I have a very high teaching load. So unlike a school that would be like a R1, Research 1 type school, like a Stanford or a Carnegie Mellon, I have to teach 2 or 3 classes every quarter. We're also on quarters, which can be intense. Most schools are on semesters now. So because of that, and my husband would agree with me, I'm a bit of a workaholic and my work-life balance is not that great. But during the day, my day job is spent advising students, meeting with students, preparing for class, teaching class, mentoring the research, the open source robotics research and human robot interaction research that my undergraduate students do. My school also does not have a lot of grad students. The benefit of being at a school with grad students is you can just give them some projects, give them assignments, wander off, come back, it's done. Undergraduate students, not so much. They have to be coached. They have to be guided. When they run into code bugs or into errors, you have to help them through that. So that's my day to day. So then in the evenings and the weekends, that's when the side gigs take on. Like last night, I had a Black and robotics meeting. Once a month, we have Black and engineering meetings. In the evenings and the weekends is when I do the work of Nowhere STEMinist. That's when I design the activities for the Children's Museum. That's when I also work on my fictional books. So day to day is my day job, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Evenings and weekends is when I do the other stuff. So work-life balance is a bit of a joke, but I like to tell people I'm doing what I love. If I was not, I would not do it. And I also have told my students, I loved what I do so much that I would do it for free if I did not have bills. So academia is about setting those boundaries. But since I am tenured full professor, I can set those boundaries a little bit more. But when you are on the tenure track, you just cannot do that. And your work does sometimes come home with you, and it does sometimes goes on the weekend. So I'm one of those people who does not do that balance very well. For example, my email is on my phone. People are like, you should never put your work email on your phone. I got all my emails on my phone because that's how I get stuff done.
That makes a lot of sense. And that tracks with what I learned about you in this very short conversation. What I'm curious about is when you're teaching young women in STEM, young engineers learning how to play with robotics, learning about the enthusiasm that you share with them, how do you encourage them? Do you say you have to be a workaholic too? Do you say you have to try harder to succeed? What do you do to make it not wane their fire by showing them how much time it's going to take to actually advance in your field, especially when you're coming already at it with disadvantages?
You want to be fair and you want to be honest and you want to equip them with the resources. One of the big challenges I had at Georgia Tech is I really struggled until I was able to identify a support group, identify a community, learn some of the cheat codes for how to study for exams that I didn't know coming from another liberal arts university that had a completely different mindset for how you engage with your professors and professors having office hours. So I don't ever want to feel guilty like I encouraged, for example, a Black woman to go into engineering without understanding some of the challenges we face. So I give a lot of presentations about the journey, the obstacles, the leaky pipeline, some of the challenges you will face, but I also talk about how to build community like Black in engineering and Black in robotics, having a mentoring program. Some of the resources I share as my engineering professor advice YouTube channel. I talk about some of those things and I tell them why it's so important for you to be there. We look at things like bias in AI, like the work of Joy Bunlamawini that looked at facial recognition systems that did not adequately recognize Black and brown faces. And then police departments were using them to arrest people for crimes that they didn't actually commit. So I talked to them about why it's so important for you to be here, but also you being here, you have to understand that this community is not ideal quite yet. And so because of that, let's support you through it, because I don't want you to be anywhere where you're going to be traumatized. So I'll tell students, I want you to graduate from college, but I want you to thrive in that journey, not just survive. Because what happens is when you just survive, like I did at Georgia Tech, I will never come back to homecoming. I will never give you money. So stop calling me and asking for it. But you want to say, I got there. It was a positive experience. I'm better because I went through that. And I now am equipped and ready to give back to my community. So that's what I tell them. I'm never going to say, I want you here. Don't worry about all the bad things that happen. Because no, you have to know about those things because they will affect your physical and mental well-being. I have quit 2 jobs in my life that were toxic. I'm now at a job that I like, so I am willing to do that extra work. And even though work-life balance is important, because the work I'm doing is important and I feel like I am respected for the work that I do at my job. But when I was somewhere where I didn't feel that way, it's just an unhealthy space to be in.
It sounds like the world of open source that you're in is slightly different than the world of open source that I normally talk to, where it's normally about maintainers or working on weekends. Often they're young, white, Western, industrialized, democratic, rich males. You know, that's how it goes. One of the things I'm noticing, though, is that it's a lot more around community. It's a lot more around drive. It's a lot more about recognizing where you are and where you want to be and really seeking support. Now, I have a question for you, which is how would you design open source communities to be more effective outside of your particular field if I want better, more Black representation in STEM? If you were to talk to the open source community as a whole, which needs more Blacks in STEM, I'm not saying it's not the case, but I'm saying outside of your angle, I'm just curious, what would you like to change about the ecosystem as a whole? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think not being so siloed. I worked a lot during my Trailblazer Fellowship with Open Source Hardware Association. And a big part of what we did were these very conversations, like, how do I educate people who don't know what open source hardware is about what it is and what it is not? How do I educate academics, professors about why they can do open source hardware work and still get tenure and still get promoted and still get their work published in journals. And I think a big part of that is educating the community about what it isn't. Like some things we've done in Black in Robotics is we have made a Black in Robotics reading list so that when people go, I can't quote anybody Black, I don't know anyone, or I can't find a Black person to interview for my podcast or interview for my article, we know, like, I can give you 5 names if you just ask. Right. So a big part is educating people about getting outside of their silo and really looking for other members of the community, learning to speak the language of people beyond yourself. So that if your work is open source, what does open source mean? Open source for who? And if your who is not you, then how do you make it for those people? You have to speak to them. Because when you don't do that, and I talk to my students, this is why you need to take ethics in class. If you are designing a product and everybody in the room testing it looks exactly like you have failed at your job. And why should it take that product going live for you to get embarrassed when, for example, Twitter releases a depixelation software and find out that it's turning every pixelized picture, including Barack Obama, into a white man? Or if somebody says, generate my AI picture to make it more professional so I can get a job, and it's turning images of Asian women into white women with blonde hair. Well, if you're testing your algorithms on someone beyond your uniform, white, pale male community, then you see that those things will happen. Like at my school, because I'm the only professor that looks like me, any work I do immediately is being tested by my students, and none of them look like me. So you have to make sure that your work is doing that. Bring in some interns from some historically Black universities or women's colleges. Go there and recruit. Don't always recruit at the Ivy Leagues, or don't always recruit in Silicon Valley. That's a great way for you to get your community more rich and diverse.
There's so much to go into in this podcast. We are not going to get to all of it. So I'm so sorry. I wish I had hours. I have to ask, you are very good at talking about specific units of work that you've done, but also talking about other people and the work that they've done. And you mentioned that you have to learn how to talk in the way that others are. You have to learn how to use the language of whatever community you want to join. Do you have any tips for that? Do you keep like a log of like what you want to say when you enter any conversation? How would you help people who aren't as articulate as you to become more articulate in these spaces?
Great question. And I hate to say, I just shoot from the hip. And I think a large part of being a Black woman in STEM, because we are so rare, is code switching. So because you have to code switch in professional environments, because I didn't mention this, but I worked as an engineer at Ford Motor Company and at Detroit Edison before I went back and got my PhD and became a professor. So having the ability to move in those different arenas and be able to be impactful so that people want to engage with you or want to buy your product or give you money to design something, you have to be able to speak their language. But also, I think a big part of it is connecting with people's heart. I probably always was not as good at this, but most people like to talk about themselves. So talking to someone and understanding what they value and mirroring that back to them a little bit, I think is really a big part of being able to do that. You mentioned your PhD, for example, and that you're starting graduate school. So I now know that when I'm talking to you, I'm going to kind of slide in some of those grad school nuggets for you, because I know that's something that you value and you find important. If I knew anything about bird watching, I would do that as well. But being a listener more than a talker, and I will say, and I tell people this all the time, I am a bit of an anomaly in engineering. There are still a lot of engineers with the pocket protectors and who look at their shoes and can't speak to you by catching your eye. But that's a big part of the work that I try to do. Is I love it when I hear a student go, "You're not like my other professors. And you don't act like my other professors." That's exactly why I did this, because I did not like how stale and boring engineering looked. I knew that it could be engaging, exciting, and fun. How am I going to ask you to come join me in this community when you don't even want to talk to me? And so I think that's just a big part of it, but it's learning to know yourself. I've talked to a lot of students about this who came to college because mommy or daddy said to go, and who picked engineering because mommy or daddy said to major in it and make a lot of money. They are absolutely miserable. Some of them have wanted to be a pianist, wanted to be an artist, and they're over here trying to shove the square peg in this round hole, and they are D'ing and C'ing and F'ing their way through the curriculum. And I'm like, get out of this. You go do what's most authentic to you, and it won't be so doggone hard.
Tell me about hip hop slam poetry.
Yes, I'm glad you asked. So during the pandemic, I was really trying to come up with ways to make this STEM for the streets thing fly and connect with young people. I was posting videos everywhere, and I had a parent say to me, you got to get on TikTok. Your target audience is on TikTok. And I know TikTok right now is all the rage because they're talking about in the Senate and making them sell it and all kind of craziness. But I honestly got on TikTok only because I was trying to find a way to take my STEM to the streets and go where the young people were. So that was the teenagers or the tweens. So the hip hop slam poetry was a way for me to now, I know I'm not Gracie's Corner or anything, but a way for me to now share things about robots with young people. And I know when my daughter was young, she's a teenager now, I taught her a lot with songs, like her address, I made it into a song. Spelling her name, I made it into a song. So I thought if I could make a song about what a sonar is, it'd be easy for them to understand. Or if I made a song about photoresistors, they could do it. So I've played some of those videos for Girl Scouts. And then afterwards I would say, what is a sonar? And they could tell me. But I think if I just sat there and talked to them and said a sonar is a thing that uses sound in order to project it, nothing. But if I say a sonar uses the Doppler effect, you know what animals do that? A bat, a dolphin. So when you put a sonar on a robot, it's moving around the world like a bat or like a dolphin. They can get that. So the hip hop slam poetry was a way for me to share in bite-sized chunks some things about robots to get robotics for the streets in the ears of the kids.
That is awesome. I love that. So cool. Since we're talking about being your authentic self, tell me about your books.
So my books, I have several. Another thing that has always driven me crazy is I love romance novels ever since I was in high school. After Flowers in the Attic, romance was my jam. And I mean romance, not 50 Shades of Grey, because some of my students found some of my romance. Like, oh, Dr. Berry writes romance. No, baby, I write romance. I don't write erotica. I write romance. So I write happily ever after, not that other stuff. I was like, God, I never see any Black women engineers. I never see any Black women scientists. It's very rare. So I started writing Black STEM romance novels because everything ties back to my mission. It may be crazy to see it, Richard, but it all ties back because I wanted to amplify showing Black women living their everyday lives, Black women as a MacGyver with a love interest. So that's where the Black STEM romance novels came from, is I wanted to read what I wanted to see. It's the same way I started my Giphy channel. I got so sick of constantly scrolling, looking for Black woman professor gifs. Or if I put in professor, it was all white guys with the tweed jacket and the pipe. So the books, the gifts, all of it was because I want to see the people I want to see doing the things that I love to get other people excited about it as well. Same for my children's books. I wanted to see children's books about kids and their robots, not just kids and their robots, but programming the robot, building the robot, designing the robot, taking care of the robot, because that then translates to I can do STEM. STEM looks like me because representation matters. And when I ask you what an engineer looks like, I want you to say it looks like me.
This might be a personal question, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to articulate it well. I'm going to try anyway. You mentioned the grad student who goes to school because their parents say they have to, and they really wanted to be a writer or to be an artist or something. And I think a lot of open source developers are the same. They start projects, they think they have to be the coolest Linus Torvalds ever, and then they just didn't. Maybe they just needed an income. Now, for you, you keep going back to my mission is to get more people in STEM. That's actually about other people. It's your mission, but it's for other people. How would you suggest that open source developers or people in general, everyone, I mean, I'm not just talking to open source developers on this podcast. I hope people realize that. How do you suggest that people realize that they can have a mission that's outside of them? Did that come easily for you? Because that's really awesome. I don't know how you got there.
It's because it's self-serving and it's for me. The things that I'm doing is because I am sick of hearing, even 20 years later, female students and Black and brown students in engineering classes having some of the same experiences I have, where if the humanities professor is talking about slavery, they're the first person who gets asked, how do they feel about that topic? Or if they're sitting in class and they know they're going to be asked something first, or that if any Black or brown person on campus does anything, then they're going to get looked at like it's affiliated with them, or that they have to represent their entire race when they walk in those spaces. So although I talk a little bit about it being external, it's actually internal validation as well, because I will be internally validated the day that a student tells me, I went to class And I wasn't called on as the only Black person to represent the Black voice because we are not a monolith, right? So although I say it's all external, it actually is internal validation for me because if the experience of kids in STEM gets better, then I know my mission has been achieved. If I now know, as my little old lady self in the future will know, that diverse teams of engineers are now designing these assistive robots for the home, the assistive robot will be able to recognize my brown face or my female sounding voice, or if I have an accent, then the things that I have doing have been achieved because I've helped diversify these teams to create better solutions for a more global and diverse world, which I will be in. So I've now created the community that will help me in the future.
Be the change you want to see in the world.
You better speak it. That's right.
This is a great place to end. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast. It was excellent to have you. Don't leave yet. I have a couple more questions. One of them is, where can people read more about you and your work and join in your efforts?
There are so many. I'm going to give you a few. blackinengineering.com, blackinrobotics.com, Dr. Carlotta A. Berry, DrCarlotta.com. And on most social media, DrCA Berry. And on some social media, you can find it under Noir Steminist. I spelled it because I made it up and there ain't no way you're going to get it right. NoirSteminist.com. That is on Twitter and Instagram.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That is awesome. Do check those links out. And now Spotlight. Spotlight's a part of the show where we highlight other people, projects, or things that have helped us out in our careers, or we just think need a little bit more light shed on them. So my Spotlight today is going to be Corina Newsom. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce her first name, but Corina Newsom, who is a Black ornithologist and birder and science communicator, a big member of the Black birder movement that we talked about earlier. She does some really awesome work on salt marsh sparrows, and I just love following her on social media because she just seems really cool, and she's also a scientist, so the best. Carlotta, what's your Spotlight today?
Thank you for asking. My Spotlight today is going to be Dr. Brandeis Marshall. She just started her own company, Data EdX, and she also runs the Black Women in Data Summit. And I am shouting out Dr. Brandeis Marshall. She was previously a professor of computer science at Spelman College, my alma mater. And she's also my co-editor for a textbook coming out from McGraw-Hill in October entitled Mitigating Bias in Machine Learning. I could not have edited this book and make this process happen without Dr. Brandeis Marshall. So I want to shout her out. And I believe her website may be brandeismarshall.com. I may be wrong about that, but BRANDEIS Marshall.com.
Do let us know when that book comes out. Happy to put it out on the channels. Carlotta, thank you so much for coming on. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining us today. If you have joined, there's a few things you can do as listeners. One, you can amplify this work by going to the show notes at podcast@oss.org and seeing all the links that we shared and then sharing them on social media. You can tell your friends to listen to this podcast. You can tell your friends to listen to Carlotta Berry on any other and all the other better podcasts, which she's probably been on. You can also email us at podcast@oss.org or go to our discourse or on the website. There are ways to reach out. Also, if you want to donate, we always accept help there. Carlotta, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on. I really appreciate it. And have a lovely day.
Thank you for having me.